Welcome to Missouri 2021 Presents. I'm Beth Pike, joining you from the headquarters of the State Historical Society of Missouri in Columbia. For the next hour, we will talk about the ancient art of quilting that is going strong in our state with special projects just for the bicentennial. Our panelists will share their expertise in how our bicentennial year inspired many commemorative quilts. And we are joined today on the program by Courtney Hughes, In-Town Education Manager at Missouri Star Quilt Company in Hamilton. And then we also have Elaine Campbell, president of the Houston Community Betterment and Arts Council, who partnered with the Restorative Justice Quilters to create the Texas County Bicentennial Quilt. And also with us is Connie Weber, naturalist resource interpreter at Echo Bluff State Park and a co-creator of the Missouri State Park Quilt. And finally, Joni Brayman, artist and physician who has been creating barn quilts in places around the country, with most of her work on barns in Missouri. First, we are going to hear from each of our panelists, and then we'll get to your questions. You can type a comment or question at any time during the program where you see the button for the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And as always, stick around to the very end and win some bicentennial promotional swag that we'll be giving away. So Michael and Courtney, I know you've been working so hard in the last few years to get this bicentennial quilt to fruition. And it's been traveling around, and want to hear more about it.
Beth, thank you so much. I appreciate you putting this thing together and all the folks who are here participating today. It's always exciting to see all these great projects being talked about. And my particular thanks to Courtney Hughes with Missouri Star Quilt Company for being here. Early on, and I think you all have heard me talk about this before, we were working really hard to figure out what would be projects that could involve all 114 counties in the independent city of St. Louis, and projects that would really encourage creativity with folks across the state. And the idea of the quilt was sort of one of the things sitting in our minds. This is actually a pretty common project for bicentennials. Indiana did a bicentennial quilt. A number of others have as well. So it's kind of a natural thing, but also quilting is just this huge part of Missouri history, life, and culture. Now, I'll be first to tell you, I know nothing about quilts, which is why first thing I did when this project kind of started having a few legs was to run over to Missouri Star Quilt Company, so Quilttown, USA in Hamilton, Missouri in Caldwell County. If you're not familiar with Missouri Star Quilt Company and story, I highly recommend you check it out. But went to them and said, hey, I've got this idea to sort of have folks from across the state participate and submit quilt blocks, and we'll do one big bicentennial quilt. We did not put a lot of strict rules on what it was people could submit. Of course, one of the ideas we thought about was, we'll have everyone do flowers, or we'll have everyone do barns or something else. But really, again, Missouri is this incredibly diverse state, geographically and culturally. We wanted to find ways for folks to kind of express what was unique and individual about their county. So really the major qualification was the block needed to somehow express something about the history, life, or culture of a particular county in the state of Missouri. So we received 203 submissions from 91 different Missouri counties. That means that not every county's block came out of the county it describes. I'll give you an example of that here in a minute. For example, let's say Randolph County is a good example of this. It was created by someone in Texas, but whose grandparents lived in Moberly, Missouri, where she spent every summer growing up. She contacted and said, hey, can I make the block for that one? And we, of course, offered that. You did not have to be a Missourian to create your block. At the end of the submission period, we pulled together a judging panel that included Courtney. I'm going to shout out to Texas County and Ray County, which both sent us in the most. I believe each sent in 10 blocks for consideration. But the judging committee selected the blocks. Missouri Star Quilt Company stitched the quilt together. My role in this was to help plot out where all the blocks would go. And what we chose to do was to do something geographical. So the blocks, while it's not a square state, most of the blocks are in geographic locations. So you'll find Clark County, up in the top right-hand corner, and you'll find McDonald County in the bottom left-hand corner. The final product includes 121 blocks, so one for every county and the independent city of St. Louis, and then 6 special blocks to help square it out. And these 6 special blocks were ways to thank partners and sponsors and participants in this big project. About the quilt, what I think makes it really interesting is really, I think it does a great job of representing the diversity of the state. It's different. It showcases all the differences in content and style and levels of craft. For example, the one in the middle on the top represents Osage County, created by Linda Roberts. And the 4 blue blocks represent the 4 rivers that run through Osage County. So the Marys, the Missouri, the Gasconade, and the Osage. And then the 2 crossbeams represent the major railroads that helped settle Osage County, so the Rock Island and the Pacific. Below that, though, is something, again, a little more figurative, right? So representing Jasper County, this was created by Robin Cragg, featuring the Route 66 sign, because Route 66 runs through Joplin, Missouri, but also the Neely Minor statue there in Webb City. So some of the biggest questions I've gotten is, of course, where is the quilt on display? COVID-19 continues to affect kind of how the exhibitions come off. So we've not necessarily released a complete schedule, again, because it keeps changing. I would encourage you to check out the Missouri 2021 Facebook page and an Instagram account. Those are where you're going to find out first kind of where the quilt is going. You can also look on the quilt page on the Missouri 2021 website. We have scanned all of these quilt block images and copied the information that was provided to us about them, and you can see all 200 blocks on the Missouri 2021 website. Under the Engage tab, you'll find a page for the Missouri Bicentennial Quilt, and that'll be your way to access those things. Well, we hope you will all come out and get an opportunity to see the Missouri Bicentennial Quilt and all the other great quilts were created for this occasion. So we look forward to seeing you out there.
Is there any I don't know, challenges you had for this? I know just probably making sure everything looked good and aesthetically where it was, but anything else? Because this is more of a patchwork quilt, right? That you would describe.
It really is. And even though you send out directions that the block should be 6.5 inches, sometimes they don't all come in at 6.5 inches. So there were a few we had to add little slivers of fabric to the sides, or in one, I believe we had to take, she actually submitted, it was almost a little bound quilt. So we just had to applique that onto another background so we could get that in the seam allowance. But for the most part, there wasn't a whole lot of that, but we did what we could and got them to work in there. So, and that's why we went with that sashing that's in between each block, because that helps keep that quilt square too. And that would help keep it true to its size and wouldn't be misshapen. So that's why we did that.
And you could probably talk about it, Courtney, because you probably patched that one together too, stitched around it, but it has all the different like corn and cotton and all the different crops and agriculture from that community is all stitched in that block. Do you want to talk about that?
That was one of the, I can't say most beautiful because there were so many, but the handwork that went into that, it was mostly all hand embroidered, and the little tiny French knots. And I just thought, how much time did it take her to make that block with all that handwork in it? It amazed me. These blocks were only 6.5 inches, and the work that was crammed in that 6.5 inches was just incredible. It's so wonderful. I could look at that quilt still for hours and still find things that I hadn't seen.
So in addition to each county represented the Missouri Bicentennial Quilt, the idea caught on. And so we also had counties who decided to create their own bicentennial quilt, which would feature the unique places in history within their own counties. So next on our program, we're going to visit with our friends in Houston, where Elaine Campbell and some of the members of the Community Betterment and Arts Council have teamed up with the Restorative Justice Program of Southwest Correctional Center in Licking and created the beautiful Texas County Bicentennial Quilt. Elaine, we're so glad to have you and your quilting crew on the program and to see your beautiful quilt right behind you.
Yes. Thank you. I'll talk about that. I have Wilda McNeil and Kay Jordan that's here helping me, and I have my husband, Albert Campbell, that's helping and making sure watching the time and tell me when to cut it. Okay. As we made our quilt, in 2018, we met with Michael Sweeney at the State Community Betterment Conference. And of course, when he came then, he was all excited and telling about the things that he was going to do. Plus, he wanted to visit in every county. So we invited him to come to Texas County. We're here in the Restored Melba Performing Arts Center, and that's where he came. And we had about 25 people that met with him. Well, after he finished, we decided that we wanted to do a Texas County quilt because we have lots of quilters and things. So we began the process of sending all the information out, inviting everybody to submit to the state quilt. And I think you had about 6 entries from Texas County. But then we told them if they didn't weren't in the state quilt, we put it in our quilt. So then some of them came back, and then we began to talk to everybody, you know, let's have a quilt block. And as she said a while ago, a 6.5-inch quilt block is not very big. And after we got to our deadline and we had 10 blocks. So then we got to thinking, what are we going to do? We've got to do something with these blocks. 3 of the blocks came from the Restorative Justice Program at Licking. And Tammy Stell, one of our members, was in charge of the Restorative Justice Program. And so they said they would help us. And since we weren't all quilters and did not make blocks, they said if we would come up with pictures or come up with blocks and what represented Texas County, they would fix it for us, make them, and then they would quilt it for us. Well, we had a roundtable discussion thinking, what are the things that we needed to have on our quilt? Well, the quilt that's behind me, and I'll just briefly tell you about some of those. We chose the looking into the attic pattern so that we were kind of looking outside or inside. And then we have as the center part of it, that's our door to the attic. And we asked them to put the state of Missouri and the bicentennial emblem, and this is all embroidered for us. This is Texas County, and in Texas County, this is the seal of Texas County. In 1976, when we celebrated the United States bicentennial, we had a contest. And the lady is Brenda Benson Starbuck, and she's still living at Plato. She's a retired teacher. She had made this seal, and it represented all of the things like our wildlife and the streams and things. And we have a big Mark Twain National Forest. Now I'm going to start from the bottom and have them to raise the bottom quilt up because it's too big to get on the top. But on the sides, we had them to put the 7 school districts in Texas County. And so this one is Success, and then there's Houston and Raymondville. We had them on the side. Then we have the biking trail that comes through Houston from the east to the west coast. We have at least 4,000 bikers that come and they stay in Texas County every year. Not last year, but every year. And they've already started coming. You know, they come from Hartville and they go all the way out down to Eminence. We have the Area Chamber of Commerce. We have the Lone Star Mill that we found a picture. And the Lone Star Mill is what first brought electricity to Houston. Then we have Flying Geese. Here's a school and some more. These are submitted ones, Flying Geese. Then we have the old courthouse. We have had 5 courthouses, and this has been embroidery. Turkey tracks, our coneflower we have all over the county. This is the Trail of Tears. Trail of Tears came down through Licking and right across Texas County. And several of us have our ancestors, our great-grandparents that were Cherokee Indians that stayed here. This is the first block I got that was submitted. Now, it's not real close, but I'll just, these are little bitty blocks. But this lady, Bobby Sparks, each one of the window panes has below the name of the block and who made it. There was a person at the state restorative justice that does calligraphy, and they did all of it here. So when you're looking at the quilt, you'll know what it is. But this was the first block I got. She used the symbol or the monument for Texas County. She had livestock. She had Emmett Kelly Park. She had our churches. She did patriotic. And these little brown squares are her 2 sons' military fatigues. So that represents our veterans. So it just fit perfect with what we were doing here. We had this, this is a schoolhouse of retired teachers. We have a log cabin schoolhouse. We have a log cabin. This represents the Lone Star. Texas County was named after the Lone Star State. Houston was named after Sam Houston. There's never been any record that Sam Houston ever came to Houston, but it was all named after him. We have Sam Houston Boulevard that runs through. Okay, as we go on up through here, we have deer antlers, little bitty tiny blocks of the deer antlers. And then the turkey, over half, 25% or 50 to 75% of Texas County is Mark Twain Forest. And so that's what that block represents. We have here another of our schools, turkey tracks. This submitted block was the Irish here in Texas County. Our churches, we have probably about 75 churches in Texas County. the census, we have the seal that's been needle pointed. Plato is the population center of the United States for 2020, or until this census comes up to 2021, it'll be moved somewhere. But it's always been anywhere from Edgar Springs to Plato and back and forth. But right now, the census was a good part of it. Then I'm going to talk about that block. But we, as a community betterment group and the state group, we have the Imagination Library and pack it back. Now, this block right here is tied to the Bicentennial block. Whenever you got finished with the Bicentennial quilt, it's tied with the Bicentennial quilt. When you got finished with choosing all the blocks in the Bicentennial quilt, you had a comment on your webpage from Mrs. Wall, who lives in the state of Washington. And she said, are you going to do another state quilt? Now, I've heard Michael Sweeney's answer to that. So I don't think you'll be doing another state quilt, but anyhow, I contacted her because she said on this comment to you, she said, I remember coming to Boiling Springs and with my grandparents and swimming in the river, and I want to make a block to put in a state quilt. Well, I contacted her and I said, the state quilt is finished or has been already chosen, but ours is not chosen. So would you like to be a part of our quilt? And she texted me back and said, well, yes, I would, but I didn't hear from her for about 3 months. And then I contacted her and she said, well, I've made 3 blocks, but I'm not really sure if I like them. So then about 2 weeks, I got this in the mail. And she said, this is Boiling Springs. From where you see it, it just kind of looks greeny, but it's really green. You do a lot of camping and canoeing and things on the Boiling Springs, part of the Piney River. And this little blue, the light blue is the water. The dark blue is where the spring bubbles up. And she remembered that from a long time ago as a part of that. Now then, we have had our quilt displayed in the state capitol. Benny Cook, our state representative, took it up for January whenever he first put it in there. Of course, you know, the state legislature was in session for 1 week and then they were off for COVID 1 week and then they had it for another week. And so it was shown there a lot. We have presented this quilt to the 4th graders and the 5th graders at Houston, and we have some more presentations that's coming up. We not only talk about things here in Texas County, but we talk about how some of these blocks go back to the Underground Railroad and what they represent in the Underground Railroad. Well, it was hard last year getting it all together because of COVID, but we did get it together and we were able to host the state quilt in December. We had it here in the theater. We had everybody wear their mask and we were able to display our quilt. Now, from here on, we're working on the ice cream social in August the 10th. Next week, we are hosting the mural over at the school so we can help finish up painting those little triangles.
No, they did a great job, and it was really helpful to see the quilt right behind you. So you can kind of give us a tour of it. So, and just the stories behind it were so endearing. And I know it really touched so many people in your community with this project. So congratulations on doing such a great job with it.
Thank you.
So next on the program, I'm going to introduce a dear friend of mine who is a talented artist and a family physician in Columbia and the creator of barn quilts. Dr. Joni Brayman grew up in Missouri and found a calling to barn quilts about 10 years ago. Joni, thanks so much for being here, and tell us what inspired you to move in this direction with your art and the process it takes to create a barn quilt.
It's really fun to listen to everyone's process here and think about community involvement. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about quilts is I think about the history. They are often so intergenerational, and they're also just a reflection of how people come together in such beautiful ways. I first began, this is me when I was little, and my mom actually used to help me make quilt blocks and put them on sweatshirts when I was little, and we made them for my teachers, which I love to make, and friends. And so it's interesting how just like there are little things that will be kind of, I think, embedded in parts of our transitional history in our lives. And then when I was in my early 20s, I later decided that I've always loved color and form, and I asked a woman who was in her 90s, a good friend who's now passed away, but I asked her if she knew how to quilt or if she knew anyone who knew how to quilt. And so she connected me with a group here in town through a church, and a now dear friend, Brenda Winkelmeyer, got me involved in learning how to quilt in a different way with fabric in my early 20s. And then in the last 10 years, that's kind of been transitioned to me choosing to do barn quilts. And I think it was just kind of a natural progression of just, again, some of my interests in design and form. And I've always loved seeing murals in other parts of the country. I did a medical rotation up in Alaska, and Seward, Alaska has murals all over their entire town. It's really stunning. It's just so beautiful. And that was really inspiring. And so I've always seen, I live in mid-Missouri, and so I've seen there's a wonderful quilt trail through Howard County, and just the beauty that those have as you're driving through the countryside. And so there's kind of a natural progression then of just kind of growing my own interest. And I think a lot of us need some type of art as a form of expression. Some people it's, working in their garden or cooking, or, I think most of us have a sort of art or creative aspect of us that is important for life. And so art kind of became some of my, some of different parts of refuge and joy in different type of ways. So Beth also asked me to speak a little bit about the history of barn quilts. And so there was, back in 2001, there was a woman, Donna Sue Graves, had an idea of trying to honor her mother, Maxine, and also some Appalachian family history. And it ended up that she ended up kind of through brainstorming different things. She ended up working with the Ohio Arts Council and creating a driving trail with painted quilts on barns, and that was in Adam County, Ohio. So that was the first kind of barn quilt trail. Now there's over 7,000 quilts that are part of organized trails through 48 states and into Canada. And I think that's just, again, these beautiful ideas of how do communities come together, as we've listened to Elaine and Courtney and Michael speak. I mean, there are beautiful ways that people honor history, honor family, and work together to create something that's lasting for a community. So a little bit more about some of my processes. So this is a picture of my first barn quilt that I painted. So I either paint them, most of them are 8 foot by 8 foot or 4 foot by 4 foot. And this was created for my father, who's a carpenter, and it was called a carpenter's wheel. So I did base this off of an original quilt design. And then I learned, like we all do with any art that we do, we learn on the process. I started with using some marine grade plywood, but in a short period of time, some of the paint began peeling, and so I learned that I realized I'd actually used one of the qualities of my paint wasn't quite right. So I ended up kind of reforming some of my process, which is always a fun thing for all of us in life. And I actually ended up calling up to Alaska to the Mural Society that I mentioned earlier, and I spoke to them about some of their processes and materials that they use. And so they use an aluminum composite signboard. And so I ended up talking to fans and signs here in town, and they I buy my for me. Just a couple other, I think my internet isn't great. Apologize.
We can hear you though. And you're back now.
Okay. Okay. So just here's a couple more pictures of some of the process of how I do some of my quilting. I kind of paint in stages, as the bottom right hand shows. There's that picture I showed earlier. I've done a lot. So what I've found that works for me is I do my design with felt, and before I do a mock-up of the actual design, and that's so I use, usually ends up being like a 2 foot by 2 foot quilt design with felt, and then I transpose it onto my larger 4 foot by 4 foot or 8 foot by 8 foot material. And this is just some of those. Oftentimes I work with my friends to kind of choose colors, and this is just kind of the laying out of some of the felt as I work through. I tell people it ends up being like a kaleidoscope, which I think is really fun too, because I've gotten so that I love to make some of my own designs, and so it's like I'm playing around and changing all the colors with the felt as I'm finding the final design that I'm trying to come up with. And it's fun because each of the ones that I've created, I have them across the country, most here in mid-Missouri, but a lot of them, I'm creating them to be reflections of the people that I love. They kind of reflect some parts of them. This is one I made for a family actually here in town. They actually have it in their living room. It's a 4 foot by 4 foot one. And then I had the boys come over and help me do some of the painting, which was kind of fun too. So that was fun to make it a little bit interactive. And I had them sign their names on the back of it in the bottom right-hand side. So that was fun too. So just kind of some different designs that I've made, and again, kind of this one's in Mocaine, Missouri, with one of my great aunts. This one's in St. Louis area. This one's down in Tucson, Arizona. This one, my great aunt Jeannie, she loves sunflowers, and this is on the outside of her house, which is obviously really fun colors. So I tried to mimic colors where it would balance her house. This was one here in Ashland, Missouri. And then this is one that will eventually make it out to Washington, D.C. to one of my sisters. It's now in my living room, so that's fun. That's a little bit about my process. Thank you all for letting me join you and talk about that.
That's just wonderful, Joni. I know when you first began working in the medium, I myself started noticing just more how many barn quilts dot the countryside in our state. So you kind of got me looking out the window, not just at the sea Merrimack caverns on the barns, but looking for those barn quilts. And just to know each one symbolizes or represents something about a family who owns that property. It really takes on a story of its own. And it's so fun to look for barn art now when I'm traveling out in the country. So speaking of places to travel, one of my favorite parts of the state is where our national scenic rivers flow. And that's where we're headed next as we welcome Connie Weber, naturalist resource interpreter at Echo Bluff State Park in Shannon County. Connie is co-creator of the Missouri State Barn Quilt, which came together during the pandemic in an effort to celebrate the bicentennial and our outstanding state parks. Connie, I know my family and I love spending time at Echo Bluff and paddling the nearby Kern and Jack Fork rivers. So I was excited to see that you're the interpreter there. And for our audience, if you can tell us what you do as a naturalist interpreter and how you came to work on the quilt. I do think our audience would also be interested in knowing some about the heritage classes that you offer as well at the state park.
What I do as a naturalist is I do the programming as that you see at night when you come to the park, when we have amphitheater programs, or if I'm not doing programming, or my other main role is stewardship. So I can be out doing surveys or pulling the dreaded invasives, like garlic mustard or spraying sericea, that stuff that we all hate. So that's a little bit of what I do. As far as quilting, I guess I started quilting when I was playing under my grandma's feet when she was sewing as a child, and she was making me, we called it the button spinner. I think they call it a whatchamacallit now. I think it was just to get me out of her hair and out from under her feet. So I would sit and watch her quilt while I played with the little button on the string. So it's been, I don't know, I started embroidering, I think when I was 4 or 5. Again, I think just to get me out of her hair, she drew a tulip on a piece of fabric and said, "Here, do it like this." So as far as the quilt goes, last year when the pandemic hit, Patricia Chambers came down and was helping me, and we were actually at Current River State Park pulling garlic mustard and talking about how cool it would be if we had a quilt to represent state parks. So I thought it was great. She took it and ran with it with one of her volunteers, and without our volunteers, this quilt would not have happened. Vicki Harding, which was, she's been a long time volunteer at Bennett Springs. She actually was the driving force behind it. And so we got together, we started talking a little bit and came up with those parameters, of course, that everybody ignored, and came up with a color scheme, again, which everybody ignored, because we're interpreters and we can't follow directions when it comes to that. We want to put our own spin on it. And if we couldn't put a spin on it one way, we would do it another, but we got it together. This is Vicki Harding. She's standing by the large quilt. There's 88 blocks total between the two quilts. We started out with this one. It has a variety of techniques in it, everything from fusible applique. There's some plastic on it. We had a couple of them that was already pre-quilted that she managed to fit in there. When I quilted this one, I kind of cringed when I had to go over the top of some of this stuff, and it was like, okay, it's plastic. Please don't let me have to rip out. I can't rip it, it won't work. So it was rather challenging. It's very interesting to see those stories that are told throughout this and how they interpreted their individual park. So that was very nice. We ended up with more blocks than that came in after that quilt was already quilted and done. So they ended up making, Vicki put it together with a very small quilt, and one of her friends, and if I could read her name off this little bit small thing, I would, but it's in the binder and on a special thank you plaque, actually ended up quilting this for us. So both of those are traveling around the state. They will be in various state parks, circulating the state as parks want them. You had mentioned that the 4-H quilt and the Missouri quilt. So the first time that I think you can see all three of them together, because I'm not sure if they were all three together at the museum or not, is at Arrow Rock State Park from the 4th through the 6th. All three quilts will be together there. So that's kind of exciting. From there, the quilt, our state quilt, will actually come to Montauk, and then it'll come to Current River State Park, where I will be using it, explaining about it and explaining about quilt processes while I teach a wool applique class that will be on May 11th. So at Bennett Springs, and I apologize, I don't remember the exact Thursday. I believe it is on their website. If you go to Missouri State Parks and then events tab, or Bennett Springs and then events tab, on Thursdays, they're actually going to be doing a block a month. So you'll actually be able to do a quilt block there at Bennett Springs. That's kind of exciting. I hope to have that at Current River State Park next year. This year, the only thing that I have quilt related will be the wool applique class that I will be teaching. It will be at Missouri State Capitol for their big event in August, and then it goes to Missouri State Fair. It's at Missouri State Cap the 7th through the 10th. I'm not sure if it will be at the governor's. I'm not sure what you mentioned it earlier, where the governor is having the event there in Jeff City.
Yes, on Statehood Day on August 10th. The
Okay.
Capitol.
I know that it's supposed to be traveling on that day, so I haven't been able to contact them with this past week to see if it was going to be there the 10th or if it was going to be traveling to Missouri State Fair, but it will be at the Missouri State Fair in August. So all 3 quilts will be there together is my understanding on that. So that's a little bit about how it came about. Like I said, it would not have happened without the volunteers that came together. Each park is represented. It was either park personnel or people from Jefferson City that works for Missouri State Parks that said, hey, we want to do a block. And so it was a multitude of quilters that came together to submit the blocks so that we could have the two quilts to travel. So
that is just wonderful, wonderful. And I look forward to having all of the quilts together too. That will be really neat when we get that opportunity. Now, I also wanted to, we've been mentioning a little bit about the 4-H quilt, and I've got a few images of it on display. So the 4-H folks made this particularly for the bicentennial. 4-Hers were asked to send in their quilt blocks to represent the area where they are from and its history, and all 8 4-H regions are on this quilt. Of course, sewing and quilting has been a long-time project of 4-Hers, so it was only natural for them to create the stunning quilt, which is trimmed in forest green. And Missouri 4-H thanks the young members and their leaders and former 4-H director, Dr. Ina Linville, for piecing the quilt together. And Apple Tree Quilt Center did the quilting with fabric donated by Joanne Fabrics. And the quilt has been traveling again with the Bicentennial Quilt and will be making stops in August at the Statehood Festivals in Jefferson City, Columbia, and at the State Fair before returning to its home at the 4-H office at the MU campus. So there we go. So hope you all have been able to check that out too as well. And now it's going to be time in the program that we're going to hear from you, our audience. If you have any questions for any of our panelists, please type it in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And we'll go and let's see what we have right now, who we have heard from. So where will the Texas County quilt be kept permanently? That's a good question. Elaine, do you want to answer that?
We have talked about where it would be kept. We have the visitor center that have said that they would keep it. Right now, it keeps traveling. We want to have huge windows in front of the senior citizens, and they have a quilt shop that it may be there for a while. But you have to be careful. You just don't put it out there for everybody to touch. I mean, it has to be under. We had it at Walgreens at the drugstore, but then permanently we have the museum here in town that will take care of it, or the visitor center will take care of it.
And another question: where are the other ones going to be housed after this year? And so I don't know if that's all been completely decided on the Missouri Bicentennial Quilt. Courtney, do you have information on that?
Yes, I believe it's been understood. We are home. Hamilton is also home to the Missouri Quilt Museum, and we are, after it's done its travels, it's going to be, its home will be here in Hamilton.
What about the state parks quilt?
I think it's going to potentially travel next year as well from park to park. There were some parks that still are not able to open their visitor center due to being shut down with county restrictions. And so we've been talking about the potential that it will go ahead and travel next year. And after that, I really honestly don't know where it's going to be stored or what's going to happen.
It says, will several be on display at the State Historical Society Columbia Art Center or art gallery? So we are going to have it on display for the Together for 21 Fest, which is the weekend before August 10th, Statehood Day. Where it's going to be placed, it will be somewhere here within our facility. We have several places within the building where we'll be putting it up. I know there's going to be several art exhibits for the bicentennial. So I don't know if the quilts will likely not fit in our art gallery, but it will likely be somewhere there in the rotunda, but in a secure place where we can display the quilts. So, so yes, people can definitely come out to Columbia to see that the weekend before Statehood Day. Also, where is the wool applique program and quilt program in the state parks. Connie, I think it's over at Current River. Is that right? Or
Right. It'll be at Current River State Park, and it'll be May 11th. There'll be if I ever get internet back, our park office has been out of internet for over a week, hence being the check station. Where I can get the information, it'll be on the event tab on Current River State Parks event tab with all of the details.
oh yeah, when you speak of 3 quilts, are you meaning the 4-H parks and state quilts? Yes, yes, in the Bicentennial. That's what we meant when we were talking about that. And then there's many counties. Elaine's group is one of many that has Bicentennial quilts. But as far as the ones that are traveling together in one spot, that's what we were talking about. What is the classification for the Bicentennial quilt type, friendship or album? Courtney, do you know that?
I would say friendship, really. I mean, it's just a feel good type of project that I think I learned a lot. I think a lot of residents of Missouri are going to learn a lot looking at that quilt. So I would call it a friendship quilt, really.
If there's any other questions, let us know. Elaine, have you learned anything more about the Missouri Star?
I found out you can have 19 patterns that is the Missouri Star. I know that in my research about the Underground Railroad, the star was very important as a signal to where the North Star was, or where there were certain places that needed to go on the Underground Railroad. And when you go and search, and if you look it up, there's just lots of things that you can find out about the star, not just the Missouri Star, but then there's 19 patterns, and there's little patterns and big patterns, but the star very much came into being whenever with the Underground Railroad and as a signal.
We had a question too about the Arrow Rock when that was happening, when all 3 quilts were together. Connie, what were those dates again?
May 4th through the 6th. So May 4th, 5th, and 6th.
Excellent. Great opportunity. So weather should be just about right too to get out and travel to Arrow Rock. So
Great. I didn't get all of the details, but evidently they're having a quilt camp there that weekend or that time frame, and that's why they wanted it, because they were already scheduled for the other 2. So it could be interesting. You would have to contact Arrow Rock State Park to find out the details on that, but it could be an interesting time.
And at Arrow Rock or in the other places where the quilts will there be any kind of presentation on them?
I think at some parks there may be presentations. At other parks, I think it's just going to be displayed in the Nature Center, and there is a book that we put together with it. I'm not sure how they're, if people will be able to look through the book, or if it's just going to be information that they will be able to take and do a program on, or be able to help them answer questions. So that's the best answer I can give you on that one. Some you'll get a program, and some it'll just be a display.
Absolutely. And then a question was if there's going to be any follow-up about the activities as they come along. And yes, if folks would follow us on social media for sure at Missouri21.org. The latest will be there as far as events that are happening, and it will always mention if the quilts are going to be in a different place. We also, please go to our website, Missouri21.org, where we keep a schedule. And what we're creating right now with some students at the University of Missouri Engineering Program is a Bicentennial app, which folks can download and stay updated. And they can follow and say, hey, I want to know about the quilt. They'll actually be able to enter that and then receive specific information on the quilt itself. So we're really excited about that app being developed. And we hope to have that out here within really the next couple of weeks. So we'll keep people posted on it as well. So again, if you follow us on social media, check our website. If you're getting our bi-monthly newsletter, e-newsletter, you can get that as well by joining us, just putting your email address when you go to the main website page at Missouri21.org at the very bottom, and you can enter your email and you'll be receiving that. So we'll definitely keep people updated on what's happening. So that's a really good question. But we are nearing the end of our program, which brings us to our prize giveaway. And this morning we had a drawing among the 149 folks who signed up for today's program, and the name our computer drew randomly is Wilda McNeil. And we're going to notify Wilda by email. So be sure to look for the email if you're watching now, and congratulations. Then next we have one question quiz for our audience who have stuck around, and a chance to also win some of the bicentennial swag here that's behind me. If you answer the question, the first person who submits the right answer will be our winner. So you'll want to, I'm going to show you the question here in a moment, and you'll want to type your answer in the Q&A box as soon as you have an answer, not the chat box, but do it to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Which block on the bicentennial quilt reflects an event that began on December 16th, 1811 in Missouri? Well, we do have a winner. So the winner is Elizabeth Wagley. So congratulations, you were the first one. So this is the quilt. This is the quilt block right here. And it represents the New Madrid quake, as you can see by the pattern. The first shocks of the New Madrid earthquake began December 16th, 1811, and continued through March 1812. And between 6,000 and 10,000 earthquakes in the Boot Hill occurred over a 3-month period, with the largest measuring 8.8 on the Richter scale. So anyway, so we always like to learn a little history when we do these things. So congratulations, Elizabeth. I'll be sending an email out to you, so to look for that today, and we'll get you some of that in the mail. So, but thank you all for being here, and we so appreciate our panelists who are continuing Missouri's tradition of quilting and passing it on to the next generation. Next month on Missouri 2021 Presents, we will travel Missouri and learn about places and events to explore this summer that will connect you to the bicentennial and discover the history, culture, and special places unique to our state. As you begin to make travel plans, be sure to join us next month. So we do hope you take time to spend some of your weekends and vacation days seeing something new in the Show Me State. Please join us on Tuesday, May 4th at 11 a.m. for our bicentennial road trip. And we do hope to have registration open by the end of this week. As always, you can sign up at Missouri2021.org, which will direct you to the online registration page for the State Historical Society of Missouri. This series is taped and recordings are uploaded on our website. We do look forward to being with you again on May 4th for Missouri 2021 Presents.